Hey gang, today I wanted to take you through my process for a heavy metal minimalist style Doom Eagle. I'll make more for other legions, chapters, and factions, and cover theory like lighting and composition all here on this channel. Step 1. Base coats. For the silver areas, I'm using natural silver from AK. If you prefer Warhammer brand paint, then Runefang silver is the most similar. Doom Eagles are a little guy chapter that often gets forgotten, but it has a neat little fan club of very passionate people, so I wanted to include them in this because they just look pretty cool. We're going to keep them a bright silver with lots of saturation in the reds. I don't show it in this, but I also did the knee pads with the same idea. We're going to basically use the same base coat color as the top coat. So if you want to do the knees yellow like me at the end, I used demonic yellow from the army painter as the base and the top. This would be Flashkit's yellow from Warhammer. Using this brighter silver here instead of the usual gunmetal or leadbelcher dark silver I normally use for the silver base, this will keep the top coat looking a lot more bright and lessen the shadows a bit. I do find with AK metallics that it doesn't really grip onto the null oil too much, so just be aware of that if you're using these. This undercoat should give a bit of colour to the null oil wash we'll do over the top. This is so I don't have to use different coloured shades for the silver, red, and yellow. I can just use the null oil all over and have a tint underneath to colour it as needed. This layer doesn't need to be perfect, but try and keep the coverage uniform. With AK, like I said, it doesn't grip onto the null oil as much as the Warhammer metallics, so try and make it as flat and consistent as you can. This will help in step 3 as patchy base coats may show through the top coat later. If you want it to be pedantic, then you can just do the null oil in the places you want it to stay, but I find a full dunk helps with in-depth coverage and for deeper shadows and speed. For the reds, I'm using Fiery Vermilion from Army Painter or Wild Rider Red from Warhammer. I just want a really nice bright orange red. Doom Eagles are very much retro tin soldier looking, so we want that brightness from the get-go. I'm gonna show this on the gun, but you'll want to do the chest Aquila red as well. If you need help with that, I covered my process for Aquila painting in the Dark Angels video, and I'll link it here. I use a more orange-toned red compared to a pure red, as the silver is obviously quite cold, so we want a nice warm-toned red instead. Using a pure red will come out looking like a cold or dull red at the end because of the amount of mini that is silver compared to the red. Step 2. Null oil. This bit does not need to be careful. Just slop it on. Puddle it in the edges and recesses for darker shadows, and try and do entire panels in as few strokes as you can, otherwise you may get tide lines as it dries. Make sure to properly shake your null oil for a minute, as I've had a couple of times I didn't and it's dried glossy because I didn't mix in the pigment enough with the medium fluid. While this dries, make a cup of tea and think about how your chapter are superior, as even though they practice morbidity in the teachings of death and mourning, they still have a living Primarch. Like this video, subscribe, and potentially become a channel member to get exclusive channels in my Discord where I post photos of my kitten and take requests for tutorials to make. I also stream painting on here and Twitch if you want to come hang out and ask questions, or watch me be bad at Space Marine 2 and other games. Step 3. Top coats. For the silver areas, again, I'm using natural steel by AK, with Warhammer Runefang silver still as the alternative. Like I mentioned previously, if you use the AK steel, it might not have caught a lot of the null oil on the flat panels, so you could be safe skipping on this step on some of the mini. If you use the Warhammer silver, then you might need to be a bit more diligent in this layer and to get a bit more coverage. On parts that are up against the wall of another panel, I leave about a millimeter or a half millimeter gap between my top coat and the crease so I can have a dark outline to separate the panels a bit and save me from accidentally going up those walls that should be left dark. For metallic paints, both AK and Warhammer, I don't like to water them down as it messes with the glitter flecks suspended in it. I basically wet my brush and swirl on the side of the metallic in my pop palette to just thin it a little to allow easier flow, but not so much that it's noticeably thinner. Because we're doing this top coat the same as the undercoat, it's just cleaning up null oil corners to be sharp and tight with solid lines. Be most careful in the recessed armor, such as on this arm, under his elbow and wrist plate, to not get the top coat on the perpendicular sides of the extruded surfaces. I'm still trying to keep that 1mm border on the inside corners, but don't worry about it too much where the gap gets too thin, as long as those perpendicular sides stay clean and dark. I recommend picking a plane to be the top, and then keep perpendicular sides dark over the whole mini. If you want some extra depth, you can leave any down or backwards facing surfaces with no top coat, and just use the top coat as highlights as per step 4. On those faces though, how much this will show with metallic paint might be not noticeable enough for this to be worth doing. Then on the red again, I'm using the same Army Painter's Fiery Vermilion or Warhammer World Riders Red. I do this in a thin layer to start, being careful to leave that millimeter or so gap for that dark outline around that inner edge. This first thin layer should be used to carefully draw the shape that you want for the red, and then you can go over it thicker to cover the Nuln darkness. And again, if you do the knees yellow, I just did these in the demonic or flash kits yellow. Step 4. Highlights. On the silver, I'm using silver from AK, and from Warhammer Paints, Stormhost Silver is your best match. Here I'm looking for a white silver to create super shiny highlights to blind your enemies. Word has it that a certain Primarch was so blinded by your chapter's armor that he was distracted momentarily, but this is just propaganda and gaslamping from Blood Angels to feel better about their Primarch getting owned by a bald man. So here I'm essentially outlining all of my top coat panels with outside edges, or like on this elbow panel, a sculpted edge in the middle. Because we're doing these over the top coat, if you make a mess, we can go back over this later with more top coat color. Again, try and not slip up onto the dark areas as it will be harder to fix. If you want more depth, only do these edge lines on front and top facing edges. This works very subtly but ends up looking pretty cool. Otherwise, go all over and edge up all of the cliffs and sculpted edges. Again, I tend to add a little bit of water just so I can use a smaller brush so the paint doesn't dry before I put it on the mini. Metallic paint tends to be a bit more sticky, so you might need to trial and error this on some sprue if you're worried. To clean up these highlights as they're only on the top coat, you can carefully straighten up wonky highlight lines, make highlight lines thinner, and fix any other mistakes you made. This bit, while you're doing it, you may need to hold your mini at odd angles so you can see where you're painting due to the glitter in the coats already on reflecting light. You will see after this in the final mini how much of a difference this layer actually makes. It's very satisfying to see, at least I think so. If you do the highlights perfect first time, then maybe you won't need to do this, but because I knew I could just fix it up after with more top coat, again, it may not feel necessary to fix due to the glitter, but it's actually quite noticeable if your white silver here is messy. On the trim, I'm picking out the outer edge or corner to highlight, and then maybe a secondary spot if I feel like it needs it. Try and feather out these highlight spots to avoid harsh tide lines, as these can be quite obvious with metallic paint. On the red gun, I've used Lava Orange from Army Painter. This is basically the same as Fire Dragon Bright from Warhammer. I did mix in a dab of the Fiery Vermilion to tone it down a little bit, but I probably didn't need to. I'm just again getting all the edges and little buttony bits. You can go around all the little vent things too, but I tend to skip that, otherwise my time spent per minis gets a little high. I also did a line between the two metallic pieces under the top handle boner for a little essence of sheen. You can skip this line if you want, I just like it being there. If you're doing the yellow knee pads and want that weird heavy metal highlight, I don't like it and I don't do it. You want to use an ice yellow or a dawn yellow. The rest of the owl. From this video, learn the things and put it to use on the rest of the mini. This style is good for quick, consistent minis that look good with only a handful of paints. In total, this arm took me about 15-20 minutes, not including the Nuln Oil drying tea break. When I painted the rest of the mini afterwards, it took about the same time as the single arm, maybe a little longer, as it's a very simple process that's meant to be fast. This is my fully finished Doom Angel Infernus Marine in this style with all his markings free-handed on. I don't recommend freehanding this as it's black wings with a white skull with black eyes. This took me way longer than I want to admit, and I think you can tell I flubbed it a bit. Sozzles. You can use transfers, I'm just lazy and I don't have a sheet for him. If you do use transfers, remember to use matte varnish over the top to get rid of that shininess. And here is a list of all the things I used in this video. And I'll make more videos for the lenses, various guns, and freehanding hacks, so don't panic if yours doesn't look like mine. I don't tend to use transfers, but I can cover those in a video as well if needed. As always, thanks for watching. Check out my other hobby content or my dumbass gaming content on the main channel. Like, sub, leave a comment how you got on, Discord is in the description, and see ya.